Good afternoon, everyone. This is dojolive. I'm Tulio Sergusa, broadcasting from Laguna Beach, and I'm joined today by my co-host Carlos Ponce in Mexico City, just outside of Mexico City, and Kim Lantis in Hermosillo.
Hi,
And
guys.
today we have, hi guys, welcome back. Today we have James Briggs, who is the CEO and co-founder of AI Collaborators, and we're going to be talking to him about how to unlock global AI innovation. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit. James, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm James Briggs. I'm located in Los Angeles. I'm CEO of AI Collaborator. AI Collaborator is my third startup, and we're focused on really democratizing access to AI for enterprises. And so I'm sure go through that in great detail here in the next few minutes. But like I said, a serial entrepreneur. I've done a lot of work also on both the enterprise side, working with large telecom providers, folks like Verizon, things like that. But the vast majority of my career now has been focused on the startup side, usually focused on leveraging new technologies to help enterprises better connect with their customers or serve their customer audiences.
Excellent. So, James, tell us a little bit. What is your customer base? Who are you targeting as your customers?
So our customer base is very large enterprises right now. So when you look at the state of the AI market, what you'll notice is that although there's tons of conversation about AI and all these great things that everybody's doing with it, but the vast majority of companies are still very early in their journey with AI. So yeah, you have the big techs like the Googles, the IBMs, and those type of players who invested a lot and acquired a lot of resources. But when you start to look at even the Fortune 500 companies outside of those folks, you'll notice that those folks are typically in the beginning of the journey, meaning they have pockets of AI resources, but they typically have not deployed AI on a widespread basis in their organization. So those are the types of folks that we're serving.
Okay, so would you say it's the SMB market, the 10 million to a billion market? Is that your sweet spot?
No. I mean, we're really Fortune 500. It's the 5 billion to 10 billion plus market.
Got it.
So yeah, and the reason is as you start to get down, lower down from the Fortune 500, you also start to see that there is a decrease in the adoption of AI thus far in their businesses. And so we started at the very top. And then as the technology is becoming deployed more broader throughout other organizations, we of course will follow along and be able to serve those organizations as well.
I'm curious to learn why you think that the smaller companies are struggling to invest. Is it a money thing? Because it seems like they would have a leapfrog opportunity. But before we go into those questions, Kim, would you please introduce the topic today? What are we talking about today? Let's go right into it.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for being here, James. So today's topic is collaborative enterprise AI, unlocking global and AI innovations for better human experiences. So for me, that keyword is collaborative. I think that sometimes we have this idea that in business it's cutthroat, right? It's us against them. And tell us how you help create this collaboration and why that's important.
So for a couple of different reasons. So I'm an entrepreneur myself, right? As I shared, I've been this is my third startup. And one of the things I've noticed is that, well, first of all, if you know startups, you know that startups spend a lot of time focused on raising money. And part of our premise with starting the company is, what if these amazing startups could spend less time out raising money and more time on generating business with these top clients that they want to access in order to give them the revenue streams that they need to fund their business, rather than being focused on going for outside sources of funding. We're not saying that we're ever going to completely eliminate that, but what we want to do is our collaborative model is such, we're really serving a couple of different audiences. We are focused on those Fortune 500 companies who have resource constraints, who want to innovate with AI, and are looking for the best path and the most efficient path to be able to do that. So that's one portion of the audience. But we also recognize and understand that when you look at the current state of the AI marketplace, startups are in fact the ones that are actually leading the way. They're in fact the ones that are doing and driving much of the innovation. So what we're focused on doing, why don't you bring these two groups together, take out the friction that is allowing them to discover and work with each other, and create a collaborative environment so we can come together to solve for AI, and everyone benefits as a result.
So James, part of your title of discussion says improving or to better the human experiences. You know, we often think of AI as this machine and robots, and, you know, it doesn't necessarily conjure up human experiences, right? But tell us a little bit what you mean by that. How can the innovation that comes from AI improve or better our human experiences? Can you talk to us of some examples of how that's being applied right now?
So for us, what that meant, and right out the door, we wanted to have as a part of our story, a differentiated approach, of course, but also a differentiated way of looking about this. What we didn't want to do was just be another provider looking to help companies reduce labor. And so, in having been in the technology space for quite a while now, what I've seen is that when businesses are so focused on reduction of costs when they deploy technologies, they often do not get the benefits that they would hope for. And so, especially when you start to look at the humans that are actually having to either the customers that are working with them, or the folks that are their employees within their company that are having to support those technologies and manage customer relationships and things like that around those technologies. And so those groups are often thought of at the end of the process rather than at the beginning of the process. And so what our mission means to us is that we help companies to think about that, think about the humans in the equation at the beginning of the process. And especially with something like AI, because there's a great potential of unintended consequences as companies are starting to deploy these technologies. So we want them to think about their customer and the experience that the customer is going to get on the other sides of these technologies. We want them to think about their employees that are using these technologies, and how are we making the employees' life better as a result of leveraging these technology. So it's just expanding the view of expanding their vision of what they're looking to get when they go out and deploy one of these solutions. And so you also asked about examples of that. I mean, it's tough to point to one specific example, but really it's when you also just, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, there is lots of potential negative consequences of how folks deploy AI. And so we're starting to see lots of discussions about the ethics of what they're doing. We also want to be able to make sure we're eliminating things like algorithmic biases and some of these other things that are really in the news today. So those are good examples of thinking about the humans in the equation.
Yeah, that's interesting. We recently had, I don't remember if he was a Columbia or Stanford professor about ethics. We were talking about how AI, one of the benefits is that in big data is that you can quickly get to massive amounts of analysis to look at patterns, right? Historical patterns. And the machine has no ego or judgment about those patterns. It just figures out, oh, it looks as though I should be talking more to women, or it looks as though I should be talking less to minorities. It has no judgment about why it makes that decision, but some of that was made on some biases in the past. So to your point, what can companies do and plan to make sure that those things don't happen, right? Just because you have historical data doesn't necessarily mean that historical data is going to be something you want to automate, especially if it's been skewed with some kind of bias. So how can people prepare? How can Fortune 500 companies better prepare so that they're leveraging this technology to improve the experience and expand the relationships they have with consumers, and not necessarily find where the sweet spot is and just focus on that because that might have been based on some bias that would not be appropriate? How has been your experience in working with that?
A big part of that is just bringing the right people to the table as part of the conversation, right? So most definitely, accidents always will happen, but if you have a diverse workforce, if you have diverse voices at the table, and if you're building a culture around these things that is focused on inclusivity and giving folks an opportunity to raise their hand when there's something, when they see something that is wrong, that's a great start of getting to the point of solving these things, because we all have our own different perspectives about things, right? And we're all coming from different life stories and different experiences. Bringing a diverse audience to the table is sort of a first step. And diversity doesn't even just mean from a demographic perspective. One thing I say is that AI is too important to be left to the engineers alone, meaning the marketing people need to be in the conversation. The operations people need to be in the conversation. So AI is going to impact every single one of us, and it's actually, in fact, impacting every single one of us every day. So it's in everyone's best interest if we can broaden the audience throughout an enterprise to make sure that everyone is clearly understanding what's the outcome that's intended. Everyone is understanding what does it mean to be responsible in your use of AI. And then also everyone understands the potential impacts and consequences of deploying different technology solutions.
I really like that idea of diversifying the team, your company first, right? In order to be more effective with any AI initiative, to first diversify and create more inclusivity within your own business, because ultimately machines do get programmed by human beings. Absolutely. And if it doesn't represent the full spectrum of every walk of life, then you're actually not fully leveraging a technology that could be very broad in its impact. What do you guys have any thoughts on this as well?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about several weeks ago, the idea that AI is meant to enhance human capabilities, not to replace the human capability. And I think for me, that's always been a really big takeaway.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I have got my kids right next to me.
That's okay. So James, I'd love to. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about. You mentioned collaboration is a key thing, right? So historically, companies have looked to have a competitive advantage, to have a unique IP that is differentiated and no one else has, right? That has historically been the approach to try to dominate the marketplace or take a big slice of the pie, if you will, by having something someone else doesn't have. But yeah, you're mentioning when it comes to AI, more collaboration. Or is that business model going to limit companies, or, in terms of not looking at this as a more collaborative approach to working? What are your thoughts on that? And how are you helping organizations if the push is to have more collaboration, to actually put down those walls a little bit and look at collaboration as a competitive advantage instead of the garden, the sort of closed off wall garden. What are your thoughts on that, and what are you seeing?
That's a fantastic question. And really what we see there is that AI is such a big, not only such a big topic, but it's going to essentially touch every part of a business. So our true belief is that there are very, very few organizations that are going to be capable of doing AI by themselves to the extent that they need to within their business. And so definitely a company might want to take full ownership of parts of the things that they do with AI. But they might determine, and what we believe that they will determine is that, we're not well suited to make all the investment, do all of this development work, and do all the things that we need to make this, although the strategic element of our business and our opportunity, operational and manageable, and all these other things that they needed to do in order for it to work within their environment. And so what we're simply saying, if you have the resources to do those things, they're likely there's other areas of your operations that still could benefit from great technologies that others are doing and doing very, very well, and can really help you more efficiently solve problems. So we're asking them to think in a differentiated fashion about solving problems. And the fortunate thing for us is that really over the last decade, and maybe going back even a little bit further, corporations, enterprises overall have been much more receptive to partnering with startups. And so there's so much complexity in their AI journey overall. And we're saying, okay, let us help you alleviate some of that complexity. Let us take out some of the friction of you getting something done by partnering up with these great entrepreneurs who've gone to these top schools, who are already out solving this problem in a very, very efficient fashion. And then, oh, by the way, you can do what Nike, what Microsoft, what Nike, what Google, what Starbucks, and these very big companies have done. At the end of the day, if you see something that you want to make priority and you want to make proprietary, work with the startup, potentially acquire their teams and get them to be a part of your team from a going forward basis. Therefore, you're able to pull that off the market for anybody else. So there's definitely a path to proprietary ownership, but the overall focus is how do you solve more quickly to be able to really compete in a market where everyone AI is actually becoming sort of an arms race, right? So how are you going to be able to compete with all that and invest at the dollar size that you need to hire these data science and technical resources into your organization? We think that there's a better way, and that way is collaborating with folks who are already doing it and doing it very well.
So in essence, you're creating, dare I say, a marketplace of experts in various fields that you can bring to bear to an enterprise and possibly save them months, if not years, of research or trying to find the right people, the right solution set, and possibly not even being aware of all the different scenarios that could be brought to bear by having access to a collective of groups of people that are already collaborating. Is that the plan, to sort of have this marketplace of collaborators that you can bring to bear for enterprises, Fortune 500 companies who are trying to solve, in some cases, fairly complex challenges, fairly complex problems? How do they engage with you? How does that work? How do you determine which people to bring into the picture?
And so it's all about understanding the enterprise's goals, their needs, down to the extent that's possible, right? So with every customer that we sit down, of course, all of their environments are unique, but actually their ways of working with companies are unique, and their ways of working with any partners are unique too, right? So we bring back partners that are flexible enough to work within the environment that the client is asking for. So we allow them to be very, very specific about what their requirements are, because the more we know up front, the better job we can do in helping them to solve. And another key piece about the way that we collaborate too is that AI collaborators always engage with our client. And so we're not a matchmaking firm per se. Really what we do is we're working with them to solve a problem area that they have identified, right? And so we work with them to articulate what their need is. And then from there, we can say, okay, based on your identified needs, here are our partners that are already meeting this. And then what we do is we don't say, hey, by the way, just go work with each other. We stay involved, we're engaged, and we're focused on how do we improve the chances of success. So if you think of Match.com, we would be Match.com and adding a counselor on top at the beginning of the relationship to ensure that there's success and we're getting the outcome that's intended in this. And part of the reason we do that, is too, because the reason that we go to collaboration anyway is because the client typically, in a lot of cases, won't have the internal resources to lead the initiative, to really challenge the technical resources on the other side in some instances. And so we bring those resources, and we bring those resources and those technologies. So not just the individuals or the technology, we bring them all together to be part of the solution.
So talking about problems and solutions, in your experience with the time that you've been with your company, what are the most common problems that enterprises are looking to solve, and how has AI solved those problems in that innovative and creative way? And also, have you seen a shift this particular year with how wackadoodle everything has been? Have there been any changes that come to mind?
You made that hard question easier by adding that little piece at the end. And there are some similarities, but each company's environment is so different, right? In terms of, it really comes down to individual business priorities. We have retail customers that are focused on, we started a journey with them being focused on better understanding their audience, more focused on things like e-commerce and things like that. But those things we definitely recognize that there are certain patterns, but it's so broad that I would just be listing off a list of types of use cases, and without really being able to say, okay, here's the most popular or anything, because it really comes down to, I think we're working across probably 4 different categories or industries, and when we recognize even some patterns across those industries, so maybe when it comes to at some point a manufacturing company, a retail company, a pharma company may all want to better understand their consumer audience, right? So how do we better personalize our website, personalize our content for that audience? So personalization is definitely something that's becoming more important. But then when you start to look at supply chains and disruption and things like that, everyone's kind of wanting to make sure that they can get their supply chain back up and going at this point, right? But to also touch on your last pieces, most definitely COVID has sort of disrupted everything for everybody. And so when we sort of look at it now, there are buckets. We've seen that everyone is understanding now that uncertainty is here to stay. So you got to learn how to deal with uncertainty. They also recognize that customer engagement, customer preferences are shifted and changed, and they're likely going to be changed going forward because customer expectations before COVID and during COVID are just completely two different things.
Right. And I guess that's a space where AI can be really, really helpful because suddenly who your client was no longer is. And now how do all of that years or however much time of research that it took you to identify and best relate to this client suddenly, boom, in an instant, no longer applies.
Exactly. So they're all having to deal with that. And the other thing now is that there's this entire, everyone's thinking about user experience, but now there's this entire another experience, that's safety experience. What is the safety experience you're going to provide to the folks that are coming into your space if you want to be able to convince them that your business is worthy of their business on a going forward basis? So that's a whole nother element that folks now have to think about. And our belief, of course, is that AI can be a big ally to them and all across all these new things that they have to do, right? And so as a result of that, we've seen an increase in demand to be able to more quick, because, and if you also think about it too, if you have a busted supply chain and you realize now that, okay, we were missing the mark. We didn't have in place what we thought we had in place. When you decide to build that back, you're going to want to build that back better than it was before, rather than going back to the old thing, right? And so AI is a way for them to future-proof and look toward the future, rather than going back and putting in place some of the other systems that they would have put in place in the past.
Well, James, we're coming up on time. So as we begin to ramp up, I'm curious to ask you, as you build this and as you put together these collaborators, I'm assuming this is a worldwide initiative. What's it like working with various cultures and different ways of doing things? How do you bring some of those things together sometimes, the differences that exist? How do you work through that? What's been your experience so far doing that?
Lots of patience. No, for me, it's actually been part of the reason that I built this company and started on this journey is that it included the things that I really love. I love getting to know and working with other cultures, and I've just done that throughout my life. And so always been passionate about that. I love, of course, startup and innovation and all these things. So it allowed me to bring the things that really matter to me together. And on the other side of that, we are a 100% distributed organization. My fundamental belief is that entrepreneurs should be able to live wherever they want to live and get access to great opportunities. I don't believe that everybody should want to or have to live in San Francisco. Not that there's anything wrong with San Francisco, but I don't believe that everyone should have to live in Silicon Valley in order to be successful, have a successful startup. There are amazing startups in little villages in Texas or little villages in Turkey or Italy and all these other places that I love to go visit, and I love to eat their food and eat with their people. But so part of what we're trying to do is to say we have the technology now to be able to eliminate the need of having to reside in overpopulate one city or multiple cities to be successful. So why don't we allow these people to, why don't we create a platform that we can establish the trust within that can really create opportunity for both parties by allowing people to be happy living where they're living.
Famous last words. We certainly believe in those same principles. It's been a pleasure to have you today as a guest, James. Thanks for sharing your journey, and we hope that Fortune 500 companies that are listening, that are on their journey to leverage AI to improve the human experience, can definitely reach out. We will make sure we put the contact information on the landing page of this show.
And the converse, right? Those smaller startup AI companies who are interested.
That's right. Exactly. So thanks for joining us. We are wrapping up for the week. We had 3 amazing shows. This Monday coming up at 1 p.m. Pacific, we're going to have the recap show, where we take the key points from every one of these shows and discuss them in 10 minutes. That's it, just 10 minutes. We give you a quick recap. Anyone who's watched that wants to participate on the recap and share your own thoughts, be one of the squares here with us, you're welcome to do so. Just drop a note anywhere you're watching us. Just drop a note on the message below and just let us know, I'm interested in participating in the recap, and we will make that happen. Thanks for being with us this week, and please stay safe, and we'll talk with you again soon.
And don't forget what we have next week, Tulio.
That's right. What do we got coming up next week, Carlos?
We got another full week full of great interviews as ever. On Tuesday, well, we're going to be speaking with, let's see who we have. We're going to be speaking with Jeff Kaufman, the CEO and co-founder of Trint. Trint is an automated, let's see what it is. It's an automated voice transcription platform that is used in communications and video. So that should be very interesting and relevant for today's day and age. And then on Wednesday, we'll be speaking with, let's see who we're going to be speaking with. That is Randy Wooton from Seismic. Seismic is an marketing automation platform which is located in the UK, in London. And finally, on Thursday, we'll be speaking with none other than, let's see, Scott Ford from Corgi Bytes. I don't really have the topics for any of these three. The guests have not sent it over to me, but I wouldn't miss them for the world. They should be as interesting as ever as was this one we had today with our guest, James. So James, thank you big time for having been with us today. And so that's what we have, Tulio and Kim.
Great. See you guys soon.
I will.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you next time.